So we're talking about this month, a series called In the Beginning. We're talking about the science of the Bible. Okay, so we're going over, last week we covered this idea in Genesis of creation and several different concepts inside of creation. And I know it was a lot of technical science. This morning will not be hard technical science. I promise you'll follow it. I love Tanya's response when I asked her how she liked it. She said, I don't know anything you said. You lost me right away. She goes, I just know there was a lot of science and the Bible is true and it's awesome. So then I had other people come up to me and tell me that was the coolest thing ever. So whether you were in the middle there, whether I lost you completely or whether it was the coolest thing ever, today will be a little bit more digestible science and stuff. And I love that kind of stuff. We're talking about OH and H2O and barometric pressures. And so it was a little complicated. So this morning we're going to be talking about the 10 plagues. So you guys know the story of the 10 plagues? Everybody here know the story? Is there anybody that doesn't know the story of Moses and the 10 plagues? I think we've all seen Prince of Egypt or something like that, right? So we understand there was these plagues that were brought on by that. So that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. And to do that, see, I want to brag just for a minute. A lot of you guys don't realize if you have teenagers, you do. If you have 11 and up, you do, that we have youth here. We were having it every Thursday, and now we've moved it to Tuesdays at 7 o'clock. But every single week, we've had youth here. We had a young man that stepped up and basically said, hey, I feel the call of God in my life to pursue ministry, and I feel a call of God in my life to help kids. A young man that started out his Christian walk here in this house. Got saved in our church and has now risen. For every day that you're a Christian, it's like he's been a Christian a year. It's just amazing how much he's grown in just a short amount of time, just studying God's Word. He's one of those guys that whenever I preach a message, he doesn't just go, that was interesting, and go home. He goes home and researches the heck out of it, reads everything, follows up with it, knows the parts that I didn't have time to get to. He's very invested and he's been great. And one of the things I wanted to give him an opportunity to do was to start not just speaking for the youth, but have an opportunity to share some of this wisdom that he has and how much he's grown with you guys this morning. So this morning I'm going to ask Jake, our youth leader, to come up this morning with us, and he's going to help me co-preach this morning. Is that okay with you guys? We got this routine worked out. I'm gonna stretch it out a little bit because we're gonna WWE this thing, okay? So we're gonna tag team off of each other, hit each other in. So we're gonna make it a wild ride of science. Woo!
Yeah!
Hey, Claire!
Science!
Science! So we're gonna have some fun this morning, okay? So last week we got really scientific, and normally I'm just a loud, charismatic preacher, and so last week was all about the science stuff of it. How many of you guys got more than one side? How many of you guys got a loud party side and a very quiet reserved side? Does anybody like that? I have every side.
They call it bipolar.
Right, bipolar. You guys ever play, anybody play D&D, have those dice with 20 sides on them? Right, that's kind of me. There's a different, I have all these different faces. So just depending on my mood. Okay, so what we're going to do is this, I'm going to introduce it and we're going to go on. All right, what is this, guys? I want to explain what this is, okay? This is called, it's hard, huh? Stand right here. Keep your hands right there, just like that. It's called the upper word, okay? IPUWER. Anyways, this was a papyrus scroll. How many of you guys know what papyrus is? Paper that Egyptians wrote on, okay? So made up of different things that actually last a lot longer than our paper. And this was a papyrus scroll that was found some time ago. It was bought in the 1800s, doesn't matter when. But there's something interesting about it when you read it, when they translated this text on this papyrus scroll. I've heard a lot of times that there's no evidence whatsoever to support that the Israelites were ever even in Egypt, let alone slaves. Okay? I don't know how many times I've heard that. Now, like I said, when I read a lot of stuff, I go down in the comments and I want to see what people have to say in the comments. I love reading other people's. I go to dinner and I'm a people watcher. Rachel will catch me just kind of looking off and I'm observing other people. I like to study people. So I read other people's comments, and of course it's always, what's so funny to me is that anything related to the Bible, there's 50 million atheist comments on there. And I just want to know what it is about an atheist that they spend all day learning about God. Tell me there's not a spiritual principle there. I don't even have to indulge in that. So anyway, so I'm going through it, and there's always a comment on there about how there's no proof that the Israelites ever were even in Egypt, let alone slaves. There's no evidence to support the 10 plagues. There's nothing recorded. So here's this papyrus scroll they found. Papyrus scroll, excuse me. that they found. And it's relevant because one of the, it talks about the plagues in there. Let me give you a little bit of what it is. Now they dated this, and they dated it, they think, that it's somewhere between 1600 and 2000. They can't tell how old it is, but they get 1600 BC to 2000 BC. That's the range they think it is. The oldest copy they have to date is around 1400 BC. Okay, so it dates in the time near the Exodus, or what they think is the Exodus. Okay, when the Israelites left the land of Egypt. All right, and so what it talks about, there's a quote in here that says, "Why really? The river Nile is blood. If one drinks it, one rejects as human and thirsts for water." Okay. It says, the land is without light. It says, it talks about different plagues. That's just 2 examples, but it talks about 4 or 5 of the plagues of Egypt, right, in this papyrus scroll. And this is not the only one. There's another one called the Prophecy of Nephirah that dates towards about the 16th century BC. And it talks about the plague of darkness. It says, the sun disk is covered over, it will not shine, so that people may see. No one knows midday falls, for a shadow cannot be distinguished. So it talks about the darkness that entered over the land. So here's 2 Egyptian manuscripts that talk about these particular plagues that had happened in Israel. So yeah, there is some evidence to say, first of all, the plagues happened. There's other evidence to support that the Jews were there. Well, what happens is people like to ignore what doesn't fit what their narrative is, right? And it's not just an atheist thing, it's a Christian thing too. We tend to reject the parts of the Bible that don't fit our narrative. Right? Oh, that's just a parable. That surely couldn't happen. There's no way God could have done all those things. All right, so moving on from this, Numbers 33:4, which is so funny. We're talking about the Exodus this morning, and the quote for the scriptures in Numbers. Who were bearing all their firstborn, whom the Lord had struck down among them, for the Lord had brought judgment on their gods. Okay, so this is a quote talking about the Exodus. So what's so interesting about that is that it gives this parallel that says that the reason for the Exodus was not necessarily against the Egyptians, but it was against their gods. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And I want to go ahead and let Jake elaborate on some of that about the gods and what happened.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So, as everybody knows, the Egyptians, they didn't just worship one god. They didn't have one particular god. They had multiple different gods. And if we look through, we already talked about all the different, we already explained all the different plagues just to remind us, give us an refreshment. So going through, the first plague, turn the Nile to blood. And by the way, guys, all these god names, I have no idea how the Egyptians actually said it, so I'm just going to do my best. So we had Hapir, which was the Nile god, and then we have Heket, which was the goddess of childbirth, but it was represented as a frog. Like, that was her symbol. So we have the Nile turned to blood, and then...
Let me see if I got it. Oh, man.
Is it kind of further in there?
Yeah, I might have messed up. Okay.
It's okay. We'll come back and... Anyways, it was represented as a frog. Like, all their little paintings and everything like that had, like, frog statues, frog paintings, all that kind of stuff. So then, frogs are dying. And then, after that, we have Hathor, which is the goddess represented as a cow. And so, all the livestock are dying then. So then that's another just humiliation to that. And then we have Isis, the goddess of life, health, and illness, and medicine, who then all of a sudden boils are on every Egyptian. So that's taking out that god. And then we have the god of men, which is the god of vegetation and protection over the crops. All of a sudden, after that, we have hail coming down, destroying all the vegetation. We have locusts coming in, eating everything. So there goes their god. And then we have Ra, one of the most powerful gods that they have, which is their sun god. And all of a sudden, in daytime, for a while, we just have the sun completely blackened. This isn't just like, oh, like a little bit of, like if we go into a room, it's kind of dark. This is like total darkness that is put over Egypt. Complete, palpable darkness. And then, after that, we even go at Pharaoh and their patron god, Osiris, which was the god of death. So in the Pharaoh, he said, let's go kill all the Egyptian, the Egyptian sons. And then God's like, you know what? Time to kill the firstborn too. And so then, their god of death wasn't able to stop that either. So this just shows that, like we're going to explain the scientific part of it, but all these plagues, they weren't just, little things that happened just to put like a little annoyance on the Pharaoh, annoyance on the people. Like they systematically attacked all of their, the religion too.
Amen. That's awesome.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That is really cool.
Very cool, right? All right, so let's talk about the first plague. talk about the first plague. Stay right here, because I'm gonna have you go. So there's two things. The blood, the Nile River turned to blood. Okay. How in the world can an entire river? It says that Moses put a staff in the water and it turned to blood. Okay, so let's talk about science. How are there's two different theories out there. There's two different things that possibly could have been what happened that day. Obviously, the third theory was actually literally blood. But there's two things that the Egyptians would have saw God doing that would have been blood. And the first one is
algae bloom. So everybody knows what algae is, right? We got, all different bacteria forms up. You see the little, green stuff. Well, it can also turn red. And this most likely happens in saltwater. However, there's been cases in Florida, over in the Carolinas, all throughout the world where it actually can happen in freshwater as well. In rivers too. Not just in stagnant water, not just in, little ponds or anything. Actual rivers going through that it turns into red. I don't know about you, but if I looked at that, I'd be like, that's blood. If I didn't know what algae bloom is going through, I would think that's definitely blood. And what happens is it's so full of toxins that every living organism in the water actually starts to die. Besides the algae, they feed on everything in there, but they start taking away the oxygen. They start taking away everything that the fish need to survive. So all the fish in there will then die and then rise. So as somebody who doesn't know what algae bloom is, I'd be like, there's blood and fish are dying.
right. Would you call that blood water? You were there?
Yeah.
All right. So the second theory is this idea about CO2 emissions in the water. Okay. So I want to show you Lake Nyos. Okay. So this is Lake Nyos. All right. It's a lake in Cameroon, which is in Africa, and I'll show you a map in just a minute of this. A little bit later, we'll talk about the map. Okay. This is a lake in Cameroon. What happened is in the early about close to 20 years ago or so, a villager stumbled on a dead cow he's walking home. He actually wanted to get the meat and save it so it wouldn't go bad, and as he stumbled on a little bit further, he found another dead animal. So he went a little further to the village to try to find the villagers to ask if it was okay if he went ahead and took that meat. And when he came upon the site, he found 100 and something villagers all dead. Okay, on their floor. They were all dead. They all lived on the outskirts of this lake. In total, I think there was about 1,800 people that died. Okay? Now, what had happened was, give me the second picture, this lake had turned to blood red. Okay? When, how many of you guys know it's freaky? You stumble upon, a scene of just mass, everyone's dead. Every single person is dead. So what happens is what happened was there's a CO2 emission that builds up in this lake in particular. This lake was near a volcanic site, and there's a CO2 that builds up, carbon dioxide. Okay? For anyone that doesn't know. And what happens is the ground got disrupted. And when the ground got disrupted, it opened up just enough for that CO2 to come out. Okay? CO2 is a very low-lying gas, so it killed all of the animals nearby. It killed all of the fish. It killed everything living inside these waters. Okay? So the water turned to blood red. So now here's what's interesting about these two theories. We got algae and we got the CO2. And either one of them allows us, let me just clarify, guys, I'm not saying that we're right. Okay, I'm not saying this is what happened. I'm saying that I'm going to let you know that God works in the confounds of His natural law, and that sometimes we're not taking God out of this. Just understand this. We're not taking God out of it. Because here's the thing I want you to remember through everything we go through. I'm going to stop real quick and just say this. Every single one of these plagues, before they happened, Moses went to Pharaoh and told him, let my people go, it's coming. The next one's coming, this is what's coming. He told him ahead of time, which means God told him. And we're going to paint a picture for you in a minute to show you how powerful God is. That in one move, one stroke of God's pen, He was able to perform all these. Not in 10 different acts. This is what the science is going to bring together for you. Not in 10 acts, in one act. Okay? He did one thing and defeated the gods of Egypt. One thing. So we start with this or the algae. Either one. So what happens is, the river turns to blood red, right? What's the second plague? The second plague is the frogs. Okay? So then the frogs come out. Why do the frogs come out? Well, frogs are oxygen-dwelling land creatures, correct? So if the lake has no oxygen in it, if there's nothing to support them, what are they going to do? They're going to flee the lake, right? They're going to flee the Nile River. So what happens? You have pestilence of frogs fleeing. Now, they've already been in a toxic environment, so what happens to them shortly after being in toxic algae or toxic CO2? They die, but they leave. Okay? So you have a pestilence of frogs because the lake is now no longer inhabitable. All right? So Jake, what do you think happens when all the frogs start dying?
I mean, usually you have dead, corpses of frogs, and I don't know if you guys ever watch any videos of that or just seen it in real life. Bugs come. Yeah, bugs are gonna come. It's nutrition. It's gonna be, all sorts of different insects are gonna come to this.
Now what do frogs eat?
Flies.
Bugs, yeah, flies. So there's no frogs to eat the flies, and then there's dead bodies for the flies to feed on. Does it make sense that maybe there would be a plague of flies, right? So what do we got after that? We got insects, and then so there's this plague of flies, right? What do insects bring with them? Disease, right? So you ever seen a cow swatting constantly at all the flies and the insects around them, right? Now imagine swarms of them have now overrun it because the entire Nile River's frogs have left. There's dead carcasses everywhere. The flies have all come, the bugs have all come, and they're infecting the cows. What's going to happen to the cows is they're going to start dying. Do you see how this is working? Yeah. There's this system of what happens. Okay, so the livestock happen. All right, and then we move on to plague number 7, which doesn't fit in the narrative. Okay, so we're going to stop right here for just a second, okay? And we want to back up just a little bit and explain some things to you. Put up that volcano thing. This is a Greek isle, Santorini, where it says volcano. There you go. This is the Greek isle, Santorini. This is a volcano. Okay, and in a second I'll show you a map of Africa. And in fact, can you find the African map that says Africa on it? I want to show you a map of Africa so you can understand where this is coming from. All right. So right around here, where it's green and yellow, I wish I had a little pointer or something like that, but where it's green and orange, right there, you'll see a little place on this south corner here. It's called Cameroon. Yeah, that'll work.
No, it's not me.
That'll be great. All right, so right here you have Cameroon. Right in here is the Lake Lynos that I just showed you that had this incident happen where 1,800 people died. Okay, the CO2 gas was emitted. And if you'll just go just slightly over here, here's Egypt. Okay, so we got Egypt over here. You see they're in the same region, right? Same kind of hemispheric plane, same kind of environmental structures. So the idea that there could be CO2 gas underneath the Nile is actually really scientifically plausible. All right, and then if you'll go straight up from Egypt, you see this little island right there? Yeah. Just above that, if we can go back to the volcano, is where that volcano is. Okay? So in ancient times, around 1600, they've gone into Egypt and excavated and found ash there, volcanic ash. When they studied the volcanic ash, they found it came from this volcano, which they know exploded about 1600 BC, about the same time as those papyrus scrolls were written. Okay? So this volcanic ash this was actually the most devastating volcano that's ever been recorded in history. Okay? It was massive, off the scale. They have found volcanic ash thousands of miles away from this thing. Okay? How many guys know, like, they're always worried about Yellowstone blowing up because right? This was the Yellowstone of the ancient world. Okay? It covered everything. So they found this volcanic ash there. Now, see what happens is, so this huge volcanic eruption takes place, all right? And they say basically, because of that, they felt it thousands of miles away. It would have felt like an earthquake every single place they went, all right? And it happened in the 16th century. Now, Dr. Daniel Stanley, an oceanographer who found the volcanic shards in Egypt, he believed that they're directly linked to that, okay? And what he found was they found pumice stones, okay? They were made from cooled volcanic lava during excavation of Egypt's ruins, despite there not being any volcanoes in Egypt. So when they studied those pumice stones that were made from volcanic lava, they found that it came from this volcano. Okay, so not just volcanic ash, volcanic lava. Okay, so we're talking about balls of lava falling down on Egypt, which brings us back to the seventh plague.
I mean, I can even go back and tie it in with other ones too.
Tie it in?
That's cool.
Yeah,
Tie me in. All right. So, who knows the country Chile? Right? I'm not the food, like the actual country in South America. Well, if anybody knows, there's tons of volcanoes down there too, and they erupt all the time. Actually, one just happened last week. And so what they've noticed is when it erupts, a lot of the ash and the fallout actually moves over the mountains over into the next country of Argentina, which is kind of far away. And what they noticed is that about 30, 40 years ago, when this happened, the fallout of the acidic rain actually turned multiple of their rivers red. So, and it came with toxins and it killed all the fish as well. So now we have 3 ways that we can explain the blood, in the Nile. So after that, obviously, then the frogs move away. They need to be wet. They need all the like the insect and everything that they need to survive, so they die. That brings in the lice. That brings in the flies. Well, also when all this fallout's coming over, it's coming over and it's going to rain. It's going to bring acid rain, and so when that happens, all the grass is going to be toxic. Animals that eat it are going to die. And the Bible only mentions herbivore animals that die in the sixth plague. So then that's livestock. And then right after that, you have sulfuric acid dropping on your skin. That's going to cause blisters all over you. So that causes the boils. So this one still goes. And now I want to catch back up.
So tag me. All right, so we have this fiery hail that comes down. Okay, so what's cool about a volcano is it can actually produce hailstorms. All right, so you can have hailstorms. So this cloud of volcanic ash actually disrupts when it meets with clouds, and so they found when volcanoes go off, they create hailstorms very nearby. A lot of lightning strikes, really weird thunderstorms, things like that. Okay, so but just imagine this volcano is so powerful that it's still hurling over lava rocks. So they see that as fiery hail from the sky, right? And then there's hail coming down. So we have this plague of hail, all right? And so because of these thunderstorms, now remember, a lot of this was happening during a dry season. If you, how many of you guys ever heard what's called the Farmer's Almanac? Right? You know, everyone talks about global warming and all that kind of stuff. If you look at the Farmer's Almanac, they've been right for like forever, okay? And so according to that, this was a dry season of Egypt, okay? So that means it would have been very dry, very hot. So locusts and bugs and things like that wouldn't have been very prevalent. So all of a sudden you have this changed environment, rain's coming, there's a lot of moisture in the air. Moisture in the air, you know, strange moisture weather cycles have brought locusts for generations, okay? Locusts come piling through as soon as moisture starts hitting. So all of a sudden we have locusts coming through. So we have the 8th plague of locusts that comes through. Now what happens when the most massive volcano erupts in the history of mankind, spewing billions of pounds of volcanic ash in the air, covering the entire air? You think it's light outside?
No.
So can we explain darkness with a volcanic explosion?
Absolutely.
Acid erosions, right? Okay? So all those things start to get answered, all right? Anything else that covers the darkness?
I mean, if you guys are just wondering, be like, well, when a volcano erupts, the ash comes up, and then wouldn't that be like the first plague? Would be the darkness, like, because that's just how, you know, volcanoes go. Wouldn't it, like, why would that be the 9th? Well, go back to the Chilean volcanoes. It's called biphasic eruptions. So they all erupt, and then they'll erupt another time. That might not be as much lava and stuff, but more ash, more gases will go. And so it would make total sense if it just erupted twice and then just one, like another ash cloud comes over.
Another giant one. Or possibly when it erupted the first time, that only some of that ash had blown that way, and then the winds could have shifted.
Easily.
Right? So the winds could shift and come that way. All right, so I want to talk to you about something that's really hard, though. Here's the problem with all this. I mean, it's great. It's science. We're understanding that God did all this. But here's what's cool is what we're trying to say to you this morning is that God, who in Numbers said that he defeated all the Egyptians' God, right? He put all those other Egyptian gods down. See, what we're trying to point to you is that there is a possibility that God didn't send 10 plagues and have to act 10 times against these 10 gods of Egypt. That he just did one act. He just erupted a volcano and set things in motion. So that's the story we're trying to paint to you this morning, is that it's possible that he just erupted this volcano, and with one move of his hand, he defeated all the gods of Egypt.
Amen.
That's how powerful our God is, amen?
Amen.
That's how powerful our God is. All right, so let me make that case. The problem is we got this idea of this firstborn. Now this is the one that troubles so many atheists. Oh, okay, so just the Egyptian firstborn died. Okay, this one is cool. You ready for this? You ready for this? So this Lake Linos, we don't have to put it up there, Lake Linos. See, what killed those 1,800 people? Here's what's interesting about Egyptian culture. If you guys don't know, in Egyptian culture, the firstborn was the honored. Okay, most of the ancient world, the firstborn son was the place of honor. Okay, mine's just a goober, so I don't know what we're gonna do. So the firstborn had 2 honors. Number 1, they got the first set of meals. Okay, they were given choice food. Okay, and number 2, they slept on the bottom floor of the house. Everyone else slept upstairs. They got the bottom floor bunk. So what could that possibly mean with first meals? I mean, is there any way to correlate?
Yeah. So locusts are coming in, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm a farmer and I see all these locusts coming in, I'm gonna take in whatever harvest I can get. So whatever's there, I'm gonna like, all right, time to bring this in. And guess what? It just rained. It's kind of wet, right? It's all right. I'll let it dry on the side.
Acid rain.
Yeah, acid rain too. So it's wet. It's kind of gross. Maybe I'm gonna wash it, and then I'm gonna put it out in the sun. It's gonna dry. No worries. Well, what came after that? Darkness. How's it gonna dry? Well, it's not. So it's all right. We're just gonna store it. It'll be fine. I have no idea what mycotoxins are and what germs are, so I'm not worried about it. And then on the first meal comes, on the surface of all this is going to be moldy wheat, moldy, everything that they had, and it's going to be filled with these mycotoxins that are going to make them super sick, and if you eat enough of it, you're going to die. And they were the first ones that have that hearty dose of the right on the surface. They're going to pick what they had, and then the rest of the family is going to be okay.
Isn't that interesting?
But if that's true, why
Not saying
did
it's
they
true.
put the lamb's blood over the door?
Ah,
How
that's
did
why
that
I like
happen?
theory number 2 much better. Okay? That's interesting. It's plausible. All we're trying to show is that no matter which one you go with, it leads you all 10 of them. Okay? So what's interesting is my lake Linos. Okay? And the reason why I think it's so important, the reason why I showed you it's in Africa. So what happens is CO2 gas is heavier than air. That's not too deep a science for you, right? CO2 gas is heavier. So it stays very low to the ground. Okay? So like if there's a fire in your house, how do they say to get out of your house when there's smoke and fire? Crawl on the ground, right? If there's CO2 in your house, that's how you die. Okay? You don't crawl on the ground, you stand up. So the Bible's very clear. He told them to mark their posts with lamb's blood and stay up all night and pray. So all of the Jewish people stayed up, stood up, sat up. The Egyptians, their firstborns were on the bottom floor of all these huts, on the floor. So as the Nile, the second eruption that brought the darkness, has disrupted the Nile River. The Nile River begins to break, CO2 gas begins to come out much more heavily than it did the first eruption. Okay? So now you have all the CO2 gas, and it takes some time. The CO2 gas finally releases from the water, and it slowly floats across the ground. And remember, this is the most giant eruption that's ever happened in the ancient world. This is the Nile River, one of the greatest rivers ever. Huge, right? Lake Linos, which is a little lake, killed 1,800 people in the vicinity. Okay? So now you have the CO2 gas, and it says the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Lord went through. And every time you watch Prince, what do you see? You see this fog go through and kill them all, right? So the CO2 gas travels across and goes and creeps into every Egyptian home. And only the firstborn, which are asleep on the floor, are affected by it, just like the villagers. But the Hebrews are sitting up, praying, and they're not affected by the gas. All of it happens from a volcanic eruption. All of it happens. Are you seeing the picture here? Isn't this cool? Okay, so then we're going to move on. So here's the problem. Finally, Pharaoh says, you know what? I can't do this anymore. This is getting to the wit's end, and I can't do this. Let your people go. Okay, now what's really interesting is in Exodus, I think we have it there, Exodus 13, 21 through 22. Can we find that, Exodus? Okay, and it says, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. So we got a volcanic. I'm not saying this is true. This one I'm not saying that I'm right on this one. Okay, but isn't it interesting? We're talking about this volcano, and now we're talking about a pillar of smoke and a pillar of fire, leading them, guiding them on their way out of Egypt. That's kind of interesting, right? Now, the largest volcanic eruption in the history also could have set off. Here's what's interesting, but guys, please don't take this as gospel by any stretch. I'm just proposing something interesting. Is that it's very possible, you know, that the Hebrews were led out of Egypt, and they went to Mount Sinai where God delivered the word of God to them, right? And if you read that story, it says that the mountain was on fire. Okay? So what are the chances that this volcano in Greece set off other seismic eruptions? And one of them happened to be Mount Sinai, where this eruption took place, and that pillar coming out of there was what led the Hebrews straight to it. They followed that other eruption happening. How interesting would that be? Right? So, but there's a problem. We still got one more big issue. Moses parts the Red Sea. Right? Now, how many of you guys have ever heard the theory that it was actually a mistranslation? It's actually the Reed Sea, which is just this little marsh full of reeds, and it's only about 4 inches of water. Anybody ever heard that before?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, some people have, right? The Reed Sea, and I like that one because they say, oh, that's a mistranslation. It was actually the Reed Sea, and it was the dry season, so it would have been dry enough for them to walk across. Well, I just think that makes my God look that much bigger, because if he drowned them in 4 inches of water, we got a pretty awesome God.
Yeah.
He drowned an entire Egyptian army in 4 inches of water. Okay, how interesting is that? What's interesting is that so we have this. We got to figure this out. So now we have this Red Sea parting. Okay, and then you have to have the Egyptian army be completely destroyed underneath it. The Bible says God caused their wheels to fall off. God
Amen.
caused their wheels to fall off. How interesting is that? Are you guys aware that a volcanic eruption can cause a tsunami? Anybody know that?
Yes.
Kind of, that's not too deep a science. It causes a tsunami. Researchers found that the size of the volcanic explosion that happened on that Greek isle could have created a tidal wave. I believe it was 600 feet high and traveling at 400 miles an hour.
Whoa. That's cool.
Is that big enough to destroy an Egyptian army?
Yeah.
Now, how many of you guys understand how water works? Like, when a tidal wave happens, what happens to the other water before it? It kind of sucks in, right? You've been to the beach, right? Right before a big wave comes, it kind of sucks down real quick and then pulls up. Are you seeing this? Do I need to explain it deeper? So they're able to walk through on dry land. So see, here's what's amazing. Once again, not taking God out of it. Because God told Moses every single time what was about to happen. And God's so powerful that he didn't have to do all these things. Numerous times he set one thing in motion. And he's like, okay, now you just got to follow my timing. I got all of this worked out for you. It'll be a piece of cake. So they follow this pillar of cloud. Okay? And they cross the Red Sea. They cross it. And then the Egyptian armies come after them. They come after them. And then this tidal wave comes and takes them down. So I know we watch the movies and we see like the parting walls and like the whales coming through, and that would be awesome. Okay? The world's first major aquarium. Alright? That's awesome. Okay? I gotta see this. I want to make this. So, but more than likely it was this giant tidal wave that comes through. Our God is so awesome, all he did was like, you know what? Egypt was the greatest economic powerhouse in the world. It was the greatest army in the world. It was the greatest nation of its day. And God defeated it with one act, not 10.
Amen.
Amen? One, he said, I'm bigger than all of your gods and I only got to do it once. Okay?
Amen.
So here's the problem. If any of the things that I'm saying are true, then we should be able somehow, there's some different theories about which actual sea they crossed and where and all that kind of stuff, and all, because it doesn't really say in the Bible. It just says they went across the Red Sea, but it doesn't say exactly where, and names change. The problem is, man, with a giant army, and we're not talking the entire Egyptian army. We're just talking about a very strong force. Okay, and people will say, well, if this was all true, why didn't the Israelites turn around and go back into Egypt and take it? Well, because Egypt is the greatest army in the world. You don't think they left enough soldiers home to defend it? They obviously left, but they were crushed morally, so they left the Israelites alone. Okay? So the problem is, if any of this is actually true, somewhere, I know it's wood, but shouldn't we be able to find something in the bottom of the ocean somewhere
They did.
that just kind of, show us that there might have been Egyptian chariots broken up at the bottom of the ocean? So I got a video real quick here I'm going to show you. Hopefully I got the right clip.
In the spring of 2000, a robotic camera was lowered into these waters for the first time.
This has never been done. No one had been in the area at all with a remote control camera.
The robotic camera's survey revealed many shapes and objects familiar to Mueller, including coral formations with right angles, arches, discs, and straight shafts fused into larger masses that had the appearance of twisted wreckage.
Now when we have been able to go back and forth with a remote control camera. We can repeatedly see that these strange structures we are looking for are there. Not at one place, but you see them again and again and again. There are situations where you see something that looks like an axle, a hub, something that looks like a wheel, and you say to yourself, this is not a coral reef, this is a coral growth on an artifact. And that is what's different to me when I compare corals at other locations around the world.
Since the earliest explorations at Nueva, one distinctive type of formation has often been identified on the seafloor. A slender, table-like structure, sometimes standing on end, with a coral-encrusted base, a straight shaft, and a circular top.
It's a 90-degree angle, a right angle, between something that looks like an axle and the wheel. And you can see this in different varieties, and it looks very different from normal coral growth. And it is like a man-made structure with a coral growth on it.
In the midst of them, Pontien photographed this circular object attached to what appears to have been a broken axle or hub. This discovery was significant for two reasons. Pontien had documented the coral-encrusted form of a wheel with dimensions similar to ancient Egyptian artifacts directly across from the proposed Nueva crossing site. Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
And the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army, and he made the wheels of their chariots come off.
Cool.
Amen, right? Amen, right?
Why don't they extract one of those?
There's all kinds of rules. The one thing that Egypt won't let us do is excavate. And in some studies, I read these articles where they were talking about if you one guy applied for a visa to do some archaeological digs, and he was a French citizen, and when they found out that he was actually born in Jerusalem, they denied his archaeological dig after they found it out. They are terrified of us proving that Hebrews once were there, and that any of our biblical stories are true. They refuse to allow us to do any archaeology. So if they would have tried to grab one of those, they would have been arrested on the spot. Okay, so it's a very hairy thing. We watched just a story recently about them excavating dirt out of the ground to prove the flood happened, and the KGB got involved, and it was like a movie. It was an amazing documentary, but the KGB had seized all his stuff. His stuff didn't make it on the airplane. He secretly got his stuff to somebody else to keep his science, until it all blew over. It was this crazy thing, but it was a documentary, and it was all true. It was wild. So they don't want them to discover that. So at least we're at a phase where now we videotaped it. How interesting is that? And the Lord caused their wheels to come off in this coral reef. All these, you notice that it was sand everywhere else? It wasn't like there was lots of coral and one had a formation. It was only these strange intermediate coral. Everything else was empty and sandy. Yeah.
Did you see in October of last year where they found a center actually down there? They were doing, Cairo University was doing a different dive, and they...
Yeah, so there's been multiple things that are found down there, okay? So she's saying there's a scepter that got found down there. I haven't looked into that yet. But how interesting is it that God did that? Okay, so now we got every single thing linked to a volcanic explosion. Would you agree? Whether that caused algae in the water, whether that, whatever that release was that caused the rest of the plagues, we got a volcanic explosion linked to it all. Once again, our God's big enough to do it in one single... Man, I'm not that interesting. If the phone's more
Hey, Rand,
interesting.
here's another interesting factoid.
Yeah.
Several years ago when I was in Turkey with my reserve unit, they had a tour of these places that they believe were their early Christian churches. And you can see markings that are carved out in the symbol of the fish.
Yeah,
Saying that this was a Christian gathering place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Inside the caves.
That's why we use a fish.
And
We're
in
called
stone,
Christians.
that's like indicative there to that area, was kind of a soft stone that they made several things out of. And there's like a makeshift kind of pulpit that they have there, and then like a bench for people to sit on, all made out of stone.
So they had church just like us, huh? Well, we did away with the pews, now we're on the chairs, so they didn't involve them. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jake, man, you did a great job. Okay, guys, I'm gonna close it up, all right? I want you to understand why this is so important. I want you to understand why do we even care about proving the Bible, okay? Why do we even care that it happened, that we can prove it? Other than the fact of people always telling us that they're just parables for us to live by, they're not actual historical documents. It's not scientific. It couldn't have happened that way. You can't just kill all the firstborn. Well, we're proving that God can do those things. God created the universe and He created it within His confines, right?
Exactly.
The universe exists in His hands. Why wouldn't the rules He created with apply when He moves?
I knew.
You know, and the rest of it is all we just haven't figured it out yet. But here's what's interesting. Why does it matter? Why does this matter? Because so many times as Christians, we hate the process. Okay? We don't like the process. We don't like step 1 through 10. We just want to go to our promised place.
Exactly.
We don't want to make it through 1 through 10. Okay, let me give you an example. How many of you guys have ever seen a lion hunt? You ever watched a show and watched a lion hunt? Or you know a hunter? Anybody a hunter? Okay, let me ask you something. A hunter or a lion, they're exactly the same. They want to hunt a gazelle, right? They will work together as a pack, and the lions will chase the other gazelles, and they'll separate one, and the head lion that's going to devour it, whether it's a woman or a guy, they say, okay, you guys don't catch the gazelle. You guys just chase the gazelle my way, and when it gets to me, I'll jump out and pounce. Okay? They got this whole system set up for how they're going to catch that gazelle. Do you know what happens when they come across a gazelle that's limping? Huh? They leave it alone. If they walk and they see a gazelle limping, they leave it alone. If a hunter is walking through the woods and he sees an animal injured, does he shoot it?
No.
I don't know any hunters that shoot it.
No.
That's not why they're there. If they just desperately needed meat, they go to the grocery store. That's our society, right? That lion is in it for the hunt, not the kill. Do you understand? He's in it for the process. He realized that there's no reward. He's not really a lion unless he can handle the hunt. He's not worthy of lion status unless he goes through the process of finding a healthy adversary and taking it down. Okay, the same thing with a hunter. A hunter is not happy with a baby deer. It leaves it alone, doesn't it? Because there's no bragging rights in shooting a baby, is there?
No.
But man, a hunter wants to take out the greatest stallion deer ever, right? Right? It's all about the bigger the better. You know, it's all about the pride of the process. Okay? We're so afraid of the process. We're so afraid of going through the 10 plagues. We're so afraid of having to step up over and over again and facing adversaries. Going to the Pharaoh and saying, let my people go, and him saying no, and we just want to give up. Right? How many of you guys know someone that gives up first time they hear no? First time they ever go through something and it doesn't work out the way it did. Well, I prayed about that and God didn't answer it. Right? We don't want to go through the process. Learn to live like a lion. Okay? You can be a lion or you can be a gazelle. That's your choice. You want to be prey? You want to be the victim or you want to be the victor?
I'm the victor.
Do you see what I'm saying? You want to be the victim or you got to be the victor? Well, there's got to be a challenge to be victorious. There has to be a challenge. There has to be a process. And we can't escape that process. Even God Himself. You don't think that God could have just snapped His fingers and let those people go? Right? He could have killed them all day one. Right? Why did He take them through 10?
Because it wouldn't have stopped the Egyptians from coming to get them.
There you go. He took it through a process. He defeated them. He took them through the process that meant the Egyptians were completely demoralized and defeated. That afterwards they weren't like those people. Our army just got crushed by a tidal wave. We're going after them again. How many of you know if they were encouraged to go after them, they would have gone after them again? They're the greatest nation on earth. They could have gone after them again. But God so demoralized them through the process that they were defeated mentally. Okay? And God so enabled and empowered His people through seeing these 10 signs and wonders and watching Moses come and say, the flies are coming. Let my people go. Darkness is coming. Let my people go. If you don't listen to me now, your firstborn are dead. Let my people go. When Moses got to that water and God said, stick your staff in the water, you can cross. Moses didn't hesitate, did he? He never hesitated. Moses never hesitated again in his life. There's never a time in Moses' life where he doubted. He might have not done it exactly right, but he always acted. Okay? And in fact, Moses got too used to the process, where he did it wrong later on. He got too used to the process. God told him to change it up, and he's like, no, that's not what we did last time. Okay, so he got too used to the process. All right, so he never entered the Holy Land because he got too used to the process. But God wants us to understand. So he built up Moses' faith the whole time, encouraging him to the point where he could get to a place and say, you know what, I'm going to stick my staff in this water, and it's going to move, and we're going to walk across. Right? That's a scary thing. This is not just waiting on God's wonders. Now they have to act. They have to cross a sea as the waters recede. Okay? He took them through a process to turn them into lions. They were slaves. They were gazelles. And he turned them into lions. And I want you guys to understand that as you go through your life, as you go through your weeks, don't be afraid of the process God is taking you through. Don't be afraid of the struggle. Don't be afraid of the learning that's taking place, because God is building you up to a place where he can set you free. Amen?
Amen.
Whoa! That's some good, man, that is good preaching right there, Pastor. Got some science, got some motivational speaking going on. That's good, church. Okay? So, amen. Don't be afraid of the process. He's turning you into a victor. I don't care what you're going through. I don't care what you faced. Everything you're going through that has hurt you, that has been tough, the plagues of your life are turning you into a lion. Okay? Sometimes we think of Jesus as the lamb, but we forget he was the Lion of Judah. Amen?
Yep.
Amen.
Okay? He knew when to be soft and he knew when to be tough. Some of us need to learn to be that lion. Some of us need to learn to engage the process and to speak the process over our life and say, you know what? Satan, let my family go, because God's doing something in my life. Satan, let my friends go. Satan, let my spouse go. Satan, let my kids go. Some of you guys need to proclaim that Satan, let your kids go and go through the process. And when he doesn't let them go this week, go through the process. When he doesn't let them go next month, go through the process, because I promise you, if you'll go through the process, there will be a day where you can stick your staff down, the waters will part, and your family will be saved.
Amen.
That's what this is about.
That's a good word, Ren.
Yeah, it is.
Sure is.
It's a God word.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yes.
That was good. God word. So next week we're going to take you through a different process. Next week is going to be awesome. Okay? Some of you guys that were at my last church, you'll remember that I talked a little bit about something called cymatics. Don't go home and Google it. I promise you learn it. Okay? I'm going to expand on that. I'm going to start with that and I'm going to expand on it. Next week what I'm going to do is, instead of explaining the Ten Commandments, or last week I explained to you all of Genesis, all the crazy wacky things in Genesis. You know, and by the way, just as a side note, I want to thank Pastor Mike. You know, he did a great job of tag teaming off of the information I gave last week and turning Bible study into an awesome Bible study. Like, I loved it. He talked about bumblebees. It was great. It was great. So I love it that we're all growing and learning. So last week I talked about all this stuff in Genesis. You know, this firmament, this ocean above and this ocean below, and all these crazy things that people say, you guys are wacky if you believe this stuff. Right? Like you know, people believe in unicorns in the Bible. The Bible says unicorn 9 times. Bible says unicorn 9 times. They're talking about rhinos, but nobody bothers to look up what the word means. It takes 3 seconds to realize it's just a King James translation of the word rhino. They called rhinos unicorns in the 1600s. There was no such thing as a fairy tale unicorn until 1800s. Like, it's not that complicated, but yet people will do anything they can to fight the Bible. So we've talked about some of those signs. So next week what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into this process of cymatic. And I'm saying that word quickly so you guys won't look it up and learn how to spell it. We're going to talk about this. And what I'm going to do to you is here's the most interesting thing. We're going to talk about Genesis 1:1. Okay? It's very simple. In the beginning there was nothing, and then God
Created the earth.
How did he create it?
Spoke it.
You just speak and stuff gets made? That's crazy talk. Those crazy people think you can speak and stuff can get created. Next week I will answer that question. I will dive into the idea that God spoke and it was created. And I'll show you the remnants of that right now. That science can prove the remnants of God's spoken word still exist in creation. Can you imagine that? What if I could show you that I could speak and create something out of nothing? Would that be cool?
That will be cool.
What, God says he took what? How did he make man? The dust of the earth, right? What if I could get up here, take some dirt, and make something out of it with my voice? Can I show you something cool next week? Come back next week. I'm going to show you how God created everything through his voice. And I promise you, this one was just interesting theories on how the 10 plagues happened. I promise you next week you will leave here and you will go, there is no doubt in my mind that the spoken voice of God created everything. And that's how all of creation happens. I promise you. You will never, ever be able to doubt the Bible again.